My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a maintenance technician for a small property management company just outside Seattle. My job isn't exciting. Most days it's clogged sinks, broken heaters, flickering lights in apartment hallways, or tenants calling because their washing machine suddenly decided to flood half the laundry room. But I like it. There's something simple about fixing things, something honest. You walk into a problem, you figure out what's wrong, and with enough patience and a few tools, you make it work again. If you enjoy stories about unexpected love, real relationships, and the moments that quietly change a life, make sure to subscribe and like the video, because sometimes the person who changes everything has been standing right next to you the entire time. I live in a small rented house on a quiet street, about 20 minutes outside the city. The place isn't fancy. Old wooden floors that creak when you walk too fast, a couch I bought from a second-hand store, and a tiny kitchen where the stove takes forever to heat up. But after years of moving from apartment to apartment, it finally feels like home. Next door lives my neighbor, Claire Donovan. Claire is 32 and works as a nurse at one of the bigger hospitals downtown. Her schedule is brutal. Night shifts, double shifts, weekends that disappear before they even start. We became friendly the way neighbors usually do. At first, it was just small things. A wave when one of us pulled into the driveway. A quick, "Good morning," when we both grabbed our mail at the same time. Then, one evening her porch light stopped working, and she asked if I could take a look. 10 minutes and a screwdriver later, it was fixed. A few days after that, she showed up at my door holding a container of homemade pasta as a thank you. After that, helping each other just became normal. If I cooked too much food, I'd bring some over. If she baked something on her rare free weekends, a plate would appear on my doorstep. Nothing complicated, nothing romantic, just two people living next door to each other. Claire was the kind of woman people noticed without her trying. Not flashy or loud, just naturally beautiful in a quiet, effortless way. But she always seemed busy, always moving between long hospital shifts and whatever life she had outside of work. I never assumed someone like her would be interested in someone like me anyway. So I never thought about it. Until one Friday evening. That night, I had a date. Her name was Olivia Chen. We met a couple weeks earlier at a friend's birthday party. She was funny, easy to talk to, and when she laughed, she had this way of leaning forward, like she was genuinely interested in whatever you were saying. We'd been texting for a while, and finally decided to grab dinner downtown. It was my first real date in months. Which is why I was standing in my bedroom staring at 3 different shirts like they were some kind of life-changing decision. A plain white one, a dark gray one, and a navy blue button-up that made me feel like I was trying too hard. I stared at them for another minute before remembering something. Claire had good taste. A few months earlier, she'd helped me pick a jacket before a work event, and I'd gotten more compliments that night than I had in years. Before I could overthink it, I grabbed all 3 shirts and walked outside. The small patch of grass between our houses took about 10 seconds to cross. I knocked on her door. It opened a moment later. Claire stood there, wearing an oversized hoodie and loose sweatpants. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she was holding a mug that smelled like chamomile tea. She looked tired. The kind of tired that comes after a long hospital shift. Still, when she saw me, she smiled. "Ethan, what's up?" I held up the shirts like an idiot. "I need expert advice." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "I've got a date tonight," I said, lifting the shirt slightly. and I can't figure out which one doesn't make me look like I'm trying too hard. For a split second, something changed in her expression. Just a flicker, so small I almost missed it. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." Her house always felt warmer than mine. Soft lighting, books stacked neatly on the coffee table, the faint smell of lavender somewhere in the air. I laid the 3 shirts across the back of her couch. "All right," I said. "Be honest." Claire walked over slowly. She touched the gray shirt first, then the navy one. Finally, she picked up the white shirt. "This one," she said quietly. "Really?" I laughed. "Why?" She looked at the shirt for another moment before answering. "Because it makes you look real." I grinned. Real is good. I want her to think I'm serious. Claire didn't smile back. Instead, she stared down at the shirt in her hands a little longer than expected. The room suddenly felt different, quieter, heavier. I was about to make some dumb joke to lighten the mood when she lifted her head. Her eyes were glossy. "Ethan?" she said softly. "Yeah?" She took a slow breath. "You're completely blind sometimes." I blinked. "What?" She looked straight at me, and then she said it. "I'm in love with you." I just stood there, staring at her. For a moment, my brain refused to process what she had said. The words hung in the air between us like something fragile that could shatter if either of us moved too quickly. Claire's eyes widened slightly the second the silence stretched too long. Regret flashed across her face. Then embarrassment. Then panic. She turned away almost immediately, placing the white shirt back onto the couch like it had suddenly become the most important thing in the room. "Forget I said that," she said quickly. Her voice sounded tighter now. "I shouldn't have said anything. I'm sorry." "Claire, no," she interrupted, shaking her head. "It was stupid. I've just been tired lately, and She stopped herself. Then she walked toward the front door and opened it. The cool evening air rushed into the room. "You should go," she said quietly. "You have a date." My heart was pounding so loudly I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to say something, anything, but my mind had gone completely blank. I was still holding the other 2 shirts in my hands when I stepped outside. The door closed softly behind me. I stood on her porch for a few seconds, staring at the wood grain of the door like it might suddenly open again. It didn't. So I walked back across the grass to my own house. The distance between the 2 houses had never felt longer. Inside, my living room looked exactly the same as it always did. Same couch, same coffee table, same dim lamp in the corner. But everything felt different. Claire's voice kept echoing in my head. "You're completely blind sometimes. I'm in love with you." I looked down at the white shirt still draped over my arm. After a long moment, I put it on. Not because she had chosen it, but because my brain didn't have the energy to make another decision. 10 minutes later, I was in my car driving toward the city. The sun had already started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple behind the distant skyline. Normally, I would have turned on the radio. That night, I drove in silence. Every few minutes, my mind replayed the same moment. The way Claire's voice had sounded when she said the words. The way her hands had tightened on the shirt. The look in her eyes when she realized she had said too much. By the time I reached the restaurant downtown, my chest felt tight. Olivia was already waiting outside. She stood when she saw me and smiled. She looked great. Black dress, hair down over her shoulders, the kind of effortless confidence that made people turn their heads. "You made it," she said, stepping forward to hug me. Of course. You look nice, she added, glancing at my shirt. White suits you. I forced a small smile. Thanks. Inside, the restaurant was warm and busy. Soft music played in the background while people talked and laughed around us. We were seated near a window. Olivia started talking almost immediately, telling me about a new project she was working on for a design client. I nodded along. I asked questions. I tried to stay present, but my mind kept drifting. Every time she laughed or leaned forward to say something, another memory pushed its way into my thoughts. Claire standing in her doorway. Claire's voice breaking. Forget I said that. You okay? Olivia asked suddenly. I blinked. Yeah, sorry. You seem a little distracted tonight. I rubbed the back of my neck. Work's been busy. She studied my face for a second like she wasn't completely convinced. But then she smiled again and continued talking. The food arrived. We ate. The conversation kept moving. But the longer the night went on, the more obvious it became that my heart simply wasn't there. Halfway through dinner, Olivia slowly set her fork down. Mason, she said. I looked up. You don't have to pretend. What do you mean? She tilted her head slightly. You've been somewhere else this entire night. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She gave a small, understanding smile. It's okay, she said gently, if something's on your mind. I exhaled slowly. I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize. I do, I said quietly. You deserve someone who's actually here tonight. She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded once. Well, she said with a soft laugh, at least you're honest. The rest of the dinner went by quickly after that. We finished eating, paid the bill, and walked outside together. The night air was cooler now. Cars passed on the street, their headlights streaking by. Olivia gave me a quick hug. I hope whatever's going on works out, she said. Me too. She smiled once more before heading toward her car. I stood there watching her leave, feeling like I had just walked away from something that might have been good. But the truth was impossible to ignore. The entire night, all I could think about was the woman living next door. The drive home felt longer than usual. When I finally turned onto my street, the neighborhood was quiet. Most of the houses were dark. I slowed down as I passed Claire's house. No lights, no movement behind the windows, just silence. I parked in my driveway and sat there for a long moment with the engine off. My eyes drifted toward her front door across the lawn. Part of me wanted to walk over, knock, say something, anything. But what would I even say? I'm sorry I didn't know? I'm sorry I didn't notice? Or maybe the truth that had been slowly forming in my chest all evening. That hearing those words from her had changed something I didn't fully understand yet. After a while, the cold air creeping through the car forced me to move. I went inside my house, dropped my keys on the counter, and collapsed onto the couch. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire standing in that doorway again, and heard her voice saying the words I hadn't been able to answer. I'm in love with you. The next 3 days were painfully quiet. Claire's car was still in her driveway, but I never saw her. No waves across the yard, no late-night lights in her kitchen. Nothing. By the fourth day, the silence started to feel heavier than the confession itself. Every morning when I left for work, I looked toward Claire's house. Her car was always there, but the porch stayed dark. The blinds never moved. No music, no footsteps, nothing that suggested life behind those windows. It felt wrong. Claire had always been part of my routine without either of us really noticing it. A quick wave when we both grabbed the mail. Her porch light flicking on late at night when she came home from the hospital. Sometimes a short conversation across the lawn about nothing important. Now the space between our houses felt like a wall. I tried to focus on work. That didn't go well. On Monday, I showed up late to a repair job because I drove past the address twice without realizing it. On Tuesday, I installed a kitchen faucet backward and had to redo the entire thing. My boss noticed. "You all right?" he asked while we loaded tools into the truck that afternoon. "Yeah," I said automatically. He studied me for a second. "You look like a guy who hasn't slept in 3 days." I forced a small smile. "Something like that." He didn't press further, but the truth was simple. I couldn't stop thinking about Claire. Not just about what she said, but about everything before it. The dinner she dropped off when she cooked too much. The way she remembered little things about me that even my friends forgot. How she always turned on the porch light if she saw me coming home late. By Wednesday evening, the quiet was eating at me. After work, I stopped at the small coffee shop a few blocks away from our street. The barista smiled when I walked in. "The usual?" she asked. I nodded, but then I hesitated. "Actually, can you make 2?" A few minutes later, I walked out with 2 cups. 1 black coffee, 1 oat milk latte with an extra shot and no foam. Claire's usual. When I got home, the street was quiet like always. I sat in my car for a minute, staring at the cup in my hand. Part of me wondered if this was a bad idea. Maybe she wanted space. Maybe she regretted everything she said and didn't want to see me at all. But the thought of doing nothing felt worse. So I got out of the car. The grass between our houses felt damp under my shoes as I crossed the yard. When I reached her front door, my heart was beating faster than it should have. I looked down at the latte, then gently set it on the welcome mat. For a second, I considered knocking, but I didn't. Instead, I turned around and walked back to my house. No note, no message, just the coffee. The next morning, I stepped outside on my way to work. The first thing I did was glance toward Claire's porch. The cup was gone. My chest tightened slightly. She had taken it. But there was still no text, no knock on my door, nothing. Days passed like that. Small signs that she was there. Her car moving slightly in the driveway. A trash bin appearing by the curb on collection day. But we never saw each other. Until Saturday evening. By then, the silence had stretched for more than a week, and something inside me finally snapped. I was standing in my kitchen, staring out the window toward her house, when the realization hit me. If I didn't say something now, the distance between us might never close again. I grabbed my jacket without thinking. The walk across the grass felt heavier this time. My heart pounded with every step. When I reached her door, I didn't give myself time to hesitate. I knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps inside. Slow ones. The door opened. Claire stood there. She looked exhausted. Her hair was tied loosely back, and there were faint shadows under her eyes, like she hadn't slept much. For a second, we just looked at each other. Mason, she said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. I'm not here to make things weird, I said quickly. I just can't keep pretending nothing happened. She didn't say anything. Can I come in? I asked. Just for a minute. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Her house felt different this time. The soft warmth it usually had was gone. The lights were dim. Papers were scattered across the coffee table. A mug of cold tea sat forgotten beside them. We sat on the couch. The same couch where I had laid out the shirts that night. The silence between us was thick. Claire spoke first. I shouldn't have said it, she murmured. You didn't do anything wrong. I did, she said softly. I saw your face. I knew immediately. I leaned forward slightly. You caught me off guard, I admitted. That's all. She looked down at her hands. I've felt that way for a long time, she said quietly. Longer than I should have. Her fingers twisted together. I kept telling myself it was stupid. You're younger, you're my neighbor, you have your own life. She exhaled slowly. But every time you came over, every time you fixed something or brought food or just smiled across the yard, her voice trailed off. It got harder to ignore. I swallowed. I didn't plan to say it that night, she continued. It just slipped out. And then I saw your reaction and panicked. She looked up at me. I thought if I pushed you away fast enough, maybe we could pretend it never happened. I don't want to pretend, I said. Her eyes searched mine. Then what do you want? The question hung between us. I took a slow breath. I don't know exactly what I feel yet, I said honestly. I'm not going to lie and say I'm in love with you too. That wouldn't be fair. Claire nodded faintly. But I do know this, I continued. The last week without seeing you, it felt wrong. Empty. I held her gaze. I kept thinking about you. Her eyes softened slightly. And I realized something, I said. I don't want to lose you. Claire stayed quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, almost to herself, I'm older than you. I know. My life isn't simple. I know that too. She looked at me again. I work crazy hours. I'm tired half the time. And I come with a lot of emotional baggage. I shrugged gently. I'm not looking for simple. Silence filled the room again. Finally, she asked quietly, What are you looking for? I met her eyes. Something real. Then I added softly, And if you're willing, I'd like to try. Claire didn't answer right away. She sat there with her hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the floor like she was trying to sort through 1,000 thoughts at once. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. After a long moment, she finally spoke. Try how? Her voice was careful, like she was afraid of hearing the wrong answer. I leaned back slightly on the couch. Slowly, I said. No pressure, no expectations. Just see where it goes. She looked up at me. You mean, like dating? I mean like not pretending we're just neighbors anymore. A small breath escaped her lips. That's a big step, Mason. I know. She studied my face for a moment. Why? The question caught me off guard. Why what? Why now? She asked quietly. Why after everything? I thought about that for a second. Then I told her the truth. Because the last week without you felt wrong. Her eyes flickered slightly. I kept thinking about all the small things you do, I continued. The way you remember what kind of coffee I drink. The way you always leave the porch light on when you know I'm coming home late. The way you show up at my door with food when you think I've been working too hard. Claire lowered her gaze again. That's just being a good neighbor. Maybe, I said, but it means something to me. She didn't respond. The silence stretched between us again, but this time it felt softer, less tense. Finally, she looked back at me. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Of what? That if we try this, we ruin what we already have. I nodded slowly. That's a risk. And if it doesn't work? She asked. Then we deal with that when we get there. She exhaled slowly, leaning back into the couch. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, I said. It's just honest. Claire stared at the ceiling for a few seconds. Then she let out a quiet laugh. You know what the worst part is? What? I've imagined this conversation in my head 100 times, she said, and somehow none of those versions look like this. Is that a bad thing? She turned her head toward me. No. Another pause filled the room. Then she nodded slightly. Okay. I blinked. Okay? She sat up a little straighter. We try. The words were quiet, but clear. Slow, she added. Slow, I agreed. No expectations. None. And if either of us feels like it's becoming too much, we talk about it, I finished. Claire gave a small nod. Deal. For a moment we just sat there, letting the weight of the conversation settle. Neither of us moved. Neither of us rushed anything. Eventually, I stood up. I should probably head back, I said. Claire walked with me to the door. When she opened it, the cool night air drifted inside again. The street outside was calm and quiet, just like always. I stepped onto the porch, then turned back toward her. Claire? Yeah? I'm glad you said it. She looked surprised. Even if it scared both of us. Her expression softened. Me too, she admitted. For the first time in over a week, she smiled. Not the tired, polite smile she gave strangers. A real one. I walked back across the grass toward my house. The night felt different somehow. Lighter. Like the air itself had shifted. Inside my house, everything looked exactly the same as it always had. But for the first time since that Friday evening, my chest didn't feel tight anymore. We didn't rush into anything after that. No sudden kisses, no dramatic changes. Instead, things started moving in the quiet, natural way they always had between us. The next evening, I received a text. Claire, pizza tonight? I stared at the message for a second before replying. Only if there are no olives. A minute later, my phone buzzed again. Deal. An hour later, I was sitting on her couch again. A pizza box open on the coffee table between us. A random movie playing quietly in the background. We talked about small things at first. Work, neighbors, the ridiculous parking situation at the hospital. But something had shifted. The air between us carried a new awareness. Not uncomfortable, just different. At one point, Claire reached for a slice of pizza at the same time I did. Our fingers brushed for a brief second. Neither of us pulled away immediately. The contact lingered just a little longer than it used to. Later, during the movie, she leaned back into the couch and let her shoulder rest lightly against mine. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. And somehow, That silence felt more meaningful than any conversation we had ever had. It stayed like that for a while. Two people sitting quietly in a small living room, not rushing, not forcing anything, just letting something new grow in the space between them. The weeks that followed didn't change everything overnight. There were no dramatic moments, no sudden shift where everything became perfect. Instead, life between Claire and me began to move forward in small, quiet steps. The kind that almost seem ordinary if you're not paying attention. But if you are, you realize they mean everything. Some evenings, she would text me after one of her long shifts. "Pizza again?" Or sometimes just, "You awake?" I'd walk across the grass between our houses with takeout or a couple of drinks, and we'd sit in her living room the same way we always had. Movie playing in the background, conversation drifting from one topic to another. The difference now was subtle, but impossible to ignore. We sat closer. Her shoulder leaned against mine more often. And sometimes, when neither of us said anything for a while, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt comfortable. One night, while we were watching an old comedy, Claire reached for the remote, and her hand brushed against mine again. This time, she didn't move it away. Our fingers rested next to each other on the couch cushion. For a few seconds, neither of us reacted. Then slowly, almost carefully, her hand turned slightly so her fingers touched mine. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just a light contact. But it stayed there. I glanced toward her. She kept her eyes on the TV, like nothing unusual had happened. But I noticed the small smile at the corner of her mouth. After that, the distance between us kept shrinking little by little. Not rushed, not forced, just natural. Claire still worked exhausting hours at the hospital, and some nights she came home so tired she barely had the energy to talk. On those evenings, she would simply text, "You around?" I'd walk over and find her curled up on the couch under a blanket. Sometimes we watched something together. Sometimes we just sat there quietly. One Friday night, she had clearly had a rough shift. I could see it the second she opened the door. Her hair was messy, the usual calm expression gone from her face. "Long day?" I asked. She gave a tired laugh. "That obvious?" She dropped onto the couch, pulling the blanket around herself. "Come sit," she murmured. I sat beside her, leaving a little space at first. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned sideways until her head rested gently on my shoulder. Her breathing slowed. I stayed still, letting her rest. After a while, she spoke softly. "We lost a patient today." My chest tightened slightly. "I'm sorry." "It was a kid," she continued quietly. 7 years old. Her voice cracked a little. "We did everything we could." She stopped talking after that. A moment later, I felt her shoulders begin to shake slightly. Not loud crying, just quiet, exhausted tears. Without thinking, I wrapped my arm around her. She didn't resist. Instead, she turned slightly and buried her face against my chest. I held her there, not trying to say anything, not trying to fix it, just letting her cry. Minutes passed. Eventually, her breathing slowed again. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red. "I hate days like this," she said quietly. "I know." She looked down at her hands. "Sometimes I wonder if this job just slowly breaks you." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached up and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. You care about people, I said. That's not breaking. She studied my face for a long moment. Maybe, she whispered. Then she leaned forward again and rested her forehead lightly against my chest. We stayed like that for a while. No words, just quiet breathing and the soft light from the lamp in the corner of the room. That night, I ended up falling asleep on the couch beside her. When I woke up early in the morning, the TV was still glowing with the menu screen from whatever movie we had started. Claire was still asleep next to me, her head resting against my shoulder. The sunlight coming through the window painted soft lines across the room. I didn't move. I just sat there for a moment, listening to her steady breathing. For the first time in a long while, something inside me felt completely calm. A few days later, I ran into Olivia again. It happened at the grocery store near my street. She noticed me first. "Ethan," she said with a small smile. "Hey." We talked for a minute near the produce section, just normal conversation. Before we said goodbye, I told her the truth. "I started seeing someone," I said gently. She nodded. "I figured," she replied with a small laugh. "You looked distracted that night." "I'm sorry about that." "Don't be," she said. "It means you were honest." We wished each other well and went our separate ways. Later that evening, when I mentioned it to Claire while we sat on her porch, she looked at me quietly. "You told her?" "Yeah." Claire reached over and lightly squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said. The weeks continued passing like that. Slow, simple, real. We still never rushed anything. No labels, no pressure. But every small moment kept adding something new between us. A shared dinner, a late-night conversation, her falling asleep against my shoulder again after another long shift. One evening, while we were sitting on her porch, watching the sunset filter through the maple trees along the street, Claire spoke quietly. "I'm still scared sometimes." "Of what?" "That I'll mess this up somehow." I turned toward her. "You won't." "How do you know?" I smiled slightly. "Because we're both choosing this." She looked at our hands resting together on the porch railing. Then she nodded softly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sky slowly darkened above the quiet street. And for the first time since she had said those 3 words weeks earlier, everything between us felt steady. The quiet rhythm between Claire and me continued for several more weeks. Nothing about our lives suddenly became easier. Her hospital shifts were still long and exhausting. My workdays were still filled with broken pipes, faulty wiring, and tenants who called about problems that always seemed to happen at the worst possible moment. But somewhere in the middle of those ordinary days, something steady had formed between us. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. Some mornings I would wake up and find a text from Claire sent late at night after one of her shifts. "You asleep?" If I happened to still be awake, I'd walk across the yard and sit with her in the quiet living room while she drank tea and slowly unwound from the night. Other evenings, she would show up at my door with food because she knew I'd worked late. We never talked about what we were becoming. We simply kept choosing each other. Then, one night, everything felt a little heavier. It was a Thursday. I was sitting on my couch watching television when I heard Claire's car pull into her driveway a little after midnight. Her headlights swept briefly across my living room window before the engine shut off. Normally, she would text me after getting home from a long shift. That night, my phone stayed silent. 10 minutes passed. Something about the quiet didn't feel right, so I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The air was cool and the street was completely still. Claire's porch light was off. That alone told me she hadn't come home in a good mood. I walked across the grass and knocked softly on her door. It took longer than usual before it opened. When it finally did, Claire stood there, still wearing her scrubs. Her hair had fallen out of its bun, and her eyes looked red and tired. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me. Then she stepped aside and let me in. The house was dim, lit only by the lamp in the corner of the living room. Claire dropped her bag on the chair and sat down on the couch, pulling the blanket around her shoulders like she was trying to disappear inside it. I sat beside her, leaving a little space. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Today was bad." I waited. She stared at the floor. "A patient died." I nodded slowly. "That happens sometimes," I said gently. She shook her head. "This one was different." Her voice cracked slightly. "It was a little girl." The words seemed to take the air out of the room. "We did everything we could," Claire continued quietly, "but nothing worked." Her shoulders started to shake. Without thinking, I moved closer and wrapped my arms around her. This time, she didn't hesitate at all. She leaned into me, burying her face against my chest. The quiet sobs that followed weren't loud, but they were deep. The kind that came from exhaustion more than anything else. I held her there and let her cry. Minutes passed before the room became quiet again. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were swollen. "I don't know how much longer I can do this job," she said. "You're good at it," I replied softly. "That doesn't mean it doesn't break you," she said. She looked at me then, searching my face. "I'm scared, Mason." "Of what?" "That I'm too broken for this." "For what?" "For us." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I carried too much with me," she said. "The hospital, the stress, all the things I've seen." She shook her head slowly. "I don't want to drag you down with me." I reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. "You're not dragging me anywhere." "You don't know that." "I do." She stared at me. "Why?" I took a slow breath. Because the truth had been forming in my mind for weeks now, and suddenly it felt impossible not to say it. "Because I choose you," I said quietly. Claire blinked. "What?" "I choose you," I repeated. "Not because it's easy, not because it's perfect." I held her gaze. "But because when I'm with you, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they looked different, softer. "You really mean that?" she asked. "I do." She searched my face like she was trying to make sure the words were real. Then, slowly, she leaned forward until her forehead rested against mine. "I'm still scared," she whispered. "That's okay." "But I choose you, too." For a moment, neither of us moved. The quiet house around us felt warmer again. Claire exhaled slowly, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. We stayed like that on the couch for a long time. No big speeches, no dramatic promises, just two people sitting close together in a quiet living room, finally saying the things they had both been afraid to say for too long. Eventually, Claire fell asleep against my shoulder. I stayed awake a little longer, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. Outside, the first hint of morning light was beginning to appear. And for the first time since the night she stood in that doorway and told me she loved me, everything felt clear. Two small houses stood side by side on a quiet street. Two porch lights that often stayed on late into the night. And between them, two people who had once been nothing more than neighbors, now choosing each other. Not with grand gestures, but with small, steady steps, every single day.